everyone. We have Mark Starr with us now. Hi, Mark. Welcome.
Hi, Joe. I just want to start by apologizing for not being here at the beginning here. I'm terribly sorry about that. I wasn't able to introduce it for you, but I sincerely apologize.
Well, we understand. And is there anything you want to say? But we do have a couple of questions. But with anything you want to say? First off, I want to say I am exhausted just watching them work. I never realized how hard, these people work. It was just amazing. But yeah. I want to hear a little bit about, I got the impression from something Mary O'Rourke said that it was probably filmed in like 2018. Do I have that right?
Yeah, this is a couple years old, I think. I've been working down there documenting the commercial fishermen for about 12 or 14 years, maybe. Yeah. I started with just plain straight photography and then went to photography and interviews and now switched over to videos, just trying to capture a port that's really in decline or has been in decline for quite some time. When I started, there was a lot more vessels, a lot more people down there, but they've been under lots of pressure from various things and have been dwindling, and that's really why I wanted to try and document that particular port over a period of time in as much detail as I could.
The editing was really well done. I'm just curious, how many hours of film did you start with?
Oh boy, I don't even know. I've turned in maybe 55 to 60 films like this to the Library of Congress, and those are all just part of what I filmed down there. So it's a lot of stuff, but a lot of it is really for the future. So this is actually just a film that was made for the general public, and each one of those people have their own hour-long feature just on them that goes in much more detail. But this particular piece was really just to get people to see what goes on in a port they may pass through on their way to Block Island. So it's really just a small part of a very large project for the Library of Congress.
Have you been able to follow these people since?
Yeah, I see them quite often. Until the virus kicked in, I haven't been down there since the virus kicked in. And I was in the middle of a project on women in fishing down in Point Judith. There's been quite a big increase in women getting into the industry, and I wanted to more fully document that, but it's sort of on hold for at least a little bit. But they're still down there fishing, and I hope when things lighten up a little bit and get back to that project.
One of our questions has to do with the COVID-19. What impact has it had on the local fishing industry? I think in Rhode Island, a law has been passed to allow selling of fish on the docks.
Yeah, and that's very unusual. The only fish that could be sold to the public directly by fishermen were lobsters because they're alive. So you could sell technically any fish that was alive, but of course they're bringing in fish that have died, and they had to go through a middleman. So it's been actually kind of nice. The fishermen have always wanted something like that where they could sell directly, make more of the profit themselves. So I think that's been a great thing for them. Overall, the virus has put a damper on fishing down there, largely because a lot of their stuff goes to restaurants. So all of a sudden, these markets that had been set up, over a long period of time, all of a sudden collapsed, and there was a scramble to find other places to ship the fish to or get rid of it. So it has had an impact, and then of course some vessels have picked up COVID. Their crews gotten it, So it doesn't seem to be real widespread down there, which is good. But it's affected them like it has everybody else.
I did see actually an app, and I downloaded it to my phone. But it was an app that would tell you who's selling what and where on, in the fishing industry.
Oh, really? Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. Huh.
Yeah, I could send it to you, but it's a great way to know exactly when they'll be there, on the docks and what docks and what they're selling.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. How have things like GPS, echolocation of fish, and other technologies changed the industry?
Oh, that's a very good question. They've changed it dramatically, as you might imagine. And all technology has really changed who can fish. Back in the 40s, the 50s, 60s, it was the fishermen who were good at fishing who were able to stay in fishing. As technology exploded, it meant that people who weren't all that great navigators or weren't all that great at noticing what nature did, they were able to start coming in using technology. And that was one of the big things that sort of masked the quantity of fish that were being brought in. That the government had, or well, up until a certain period, all international fishing vessels from places like Russia and things, you might have even seen them if you're old enough. Russian trawlers could come in fairly close to the United States coast. And they passed an act which pushed the coastal limits out 200 miles to other fishermen, international, from other nations, I'm sorry. And so what happened is the government said, okay, now this 200 miles out is all of our grounds. Let's fish. And they started promoting fishing and giving out money to fishermen or to anybody who wanted to start fishing. And they started building big trawlers, very powerful trawlers, to take advantage of that. And corporations that had never fished got into the business. Whereas up until that period, it was really, generational fishermen on small boats. But what happened along with that, with these very big, powerful trawlers, is echolocation of fish, GPS, all these new technologies that allowed people who didn't necessarily grow up learning how to fish to fish very efficiently. And simultaneously, the government, the traditional fishermen were saying, look, there's too much fishing out there. This isn't good. We have to stop it. But the government was saying, we're watching the level of fish coming in, and as soon as that starts to decline, we're going to put a stop to it. But what happened is the electronics were allowing fishermen to catch smaller and smaller amounts of fish, whereas they used to have to hit big schools. Now they could catch smaller and smaller schools, and then all of a sudden the graph just dropped because now there were not even the small schools. And then the government panicked and said, oh my gosh, we don't know what happened, but all the fish are gone. We're going to buy back boats. And so all the corporations who didn't really care about fishing but took advantage of the government money said, yeah, sure, buy our boats back. There's no fish. And they left really the bag in the hands of the traditional fishermen, who had been fishing for generations. So that was a clear indication where, the electronics were hidden from government view because they weren't looking at that, but caused a tremendous amount of damage. So it's been coming back now that the government understands that electronics have given them an edge and stuff. But it certainly changed who was fishing. But I think it's, at least in Point Judith, it's back to the more traditional fishermen. The fishermen who have survived there today really are very good fishermen, the ones who are able to go through all these ups and downs that the industry's gone through. So it's stabilized somewhat, I think. Hopefully the attrition is going to end, and that the port can maintain some level of commercial fishing.
Are they all day fishermen?
Day boats? No, there's two sets. There's sets that typically go out for about 5-day trips, like the Squid boats will often go out to George's Banks. It's a day to steam out there. They fish for 3 days or 4 days and steam back. And then there are day fishermen. So there's day lobster boats that only go out for the day, and then there's offshore lobster boats that go out for 3, 4, or 5 days or even longer. They go much further offshore, much deeper waters. And the same with all the trawlers. The little trawlers down there basically are day boats, and the bigger boats go out for longer periods. And may not even land back in Point Judith. Sometimes they'll do trips. It's very complicated the way the government has the regulations, but they may take a trip up here and land it in North Carolina. Or they may start in North Carolina and land fish up here. And today in Point Judith, they're trying to keep the harbor, the guy in charge of the harbor is trying to keep the number of vessels in the port high so that all the subsidiary industries don't disappear. So there are a lot of vessels that you'll see down there that come up from Cape May, New Jersey, or other ports up and down the Atlantic coast that may only be in Point Judith for a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes they come in just for repairs, whereas it used to be more just Point Judith boats. Today, if you look at the backs of the boats, you'll see where they're from, and a lot more of them are coming from further away.
Okay, we have another question. When a net or a line of lobster traps are lost, what kind of efforts are available to retrieve them?
The nets on the trawlers don't generally get lost. They get torn to pieces, but they've got steel cable on them. So they usually bring back everything. Now, there are fisheries that use nets that are placed in the water and left there, gill netting, for instance. And those can get lost and continue ghost fishing. So that can happen with there. There's a limited amount of gill netters out of Point Judith. There is some gill netting. Most of it is trawling. The lobster pots can get lost, often towed apart by draggers that hit them, or very big storms can carry them away. Those traps have clips in them that will eventually just rust and let the cage fall apart. But even that with lobsters, there's some film that's been put on by universities that show that lobsters basically are never trapped in a lobster pot. They walk in and out just like, whenever they want. It's only their bad luck that they're in the trap when it's pulled up. So lobster trap ghost fishing isn't really a problem. They do fall apart, but lobsters come and go of their own free will, basically, when they're on the ground. So there is some problem with drift netting. You've got the big drift nets that are set by very large ocean vessels that don't come out of Point Judith, and they can set miles and miles of net. And if that's lost, it's pretty bad. I don't really know. I assume they go after the net as best they can. They usually have high flyer buoys on them and sometimes radio beacons to relocate them. And it's quite a bit of money, so I assume they track them down, but I don't actually know, percentage-wise what sort of nets are floating out there.
Okay, another question. Are there apprentices in place to learn the craft of net modification and repair? Are there going to be future generations with these skills?
Yeah, that's one thing with all the skills that are associated with fishing that have declined drastically. In the past, you couldn't get a position on a boat if you couldn't mend nets. Now it's very rare to find a fisherman who knows how to mend nets, other than some very basic rudimentary things. And in terms of making new nets, basically there's no real apprenticeship. It's somebody comes in and says, "Hey, you got a job," and whether they're willing or not to teach them at that particular point. And that's been true with all the skills associated with fishing. It's been very hard lately for them to get people to go out fishing. There's no, in the past, the typical path would be you go on as a teenager on the back deck of a boat and you start learning and you work your way up and eventually you own one of the boats. And that path existed for a very long time, but that path no longer exists really. There are only a limited number of licenses available. So for young people, it's a lifestyle that's not what most people live. So you really want to have to do it. But then the idea that you're going to have your own boat is very small possibility nowadays. There are very limited licenses. So that doesn't help. And plus, people would rather be in an air-conditioned office working on a computer usually than out on a deck. But
I would imagine that those boats are pretty costly too, aren't they?
Yeah, the boats are very, very costly. I mean, to give you one example, the scallop boats, there was a small scallop boat at the end of this film that you saw, but the big scallop boats, which are very big money, and this is going back, I bet 7 or 8 years ago, it used to cost a little over $1 million to fish for 30 days. Plus you needed $1.5 million boat. That's not something that the local family-owned fishing person can do anymore. It used to be, but now I think, and it may not even be, this again was years ago, there were only 4 dayboat scallopers out of all of Rhode Island. Most of them come out of New Bedford now. There are big scalpers out of Point Judith as well, but it tends to be more corporate that can afford the multi-million-dollar licenses required to do that.
Okay, we have another question. When I was a child, my dad became good friends with the skipper of a 70-foot dragger out of Stonington, Connecticut. He often joined Captain McLaughlin on the Maurice, and when I reached age 10, I was allowed to join them. The video mentioned keeping whiting and showed keeping lots of skate. I remember always throwing those back as trash and concentrating on fluke, butterfish, and scup.
Yep. Yeah. The skates are all used for bait, although they do cut skate wings on the really big skates. They'll wing them, cut the wings off, and that's used as food for humans. But primarily the skates going into Point Judith are used as lobster bait. Down here, the waters get very warm as compared to Maine, so the skate does not break down too quickly down here. Up in Maine, they'll use softer fish. Typically, they like herring, pogies, softer fish in the colder water, which will break down faster in the colder water and attract more lobsters. So most of the skate goes into lobster bait down here and would be considered trash generally by most.
Okay, the next question, I think I would ask this myself. Do you have any trouble getting folks to talk freely with you? Maybe I don't really want to know, but do the fishermen express opinions on the tourists who watch them unload, etc.? I love to watch, but I figure I'm just a pain.
No, you know what I found down Point Judith was that they're very friendly, and actually most of them really do want to educate people who ask them questions. If you go up and you're sincere and ask questions, most of them are really pretty good. I found I was going out when I first started. I was going out to sea with them for 5-day trips, and I just walk up and say, "This is who I am. I'm trying to document what you're doing. Could I go out with you?" And without knowing who I was, whether I would trip in the gear and cut my arm off and sue them, they would just say, "Sure, we leave at midnight. Just stay out of our way." And that was the whole conversation. Mm-hmm. So they do understand that public perception is very important to what they do, and they're very proud of what they do. I think they're very well spoken. Now you know, it's not to say you can't get somebody who's in a bad mood, but I find I've never had a problem with them, and I'm sure they make jokes about me and tourism. That's just, you know, part of the course. But they really do want to educate people. And I've talked to people who've come to Point Judith on vacations for years and got to know some of the fishermen. And when they go and meet them, they'll take them on the boat, give them tours, give them fish. I mean, you can develop some pretty nice relationships there.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. What factors caused Point Judith to become such a large harvester of squid?
Yeah, well, of course, it's just the area that squid come into. Without that, they certainly wouldn't be. Point Judith is an interesting port in that it was, well, at least in the past, it was on in the middle between the cold water fishing to the north and the warmer water fishing to the south. And so where places like New Bedford are fairly fixed in what they fish for, Point Judith was the master of changing gear and fishing styles or fishing techniques to suit what fish were going north to get into cooler water or heading south to get into warmer water as the seasons change. So they're very capable of fishing all types of fisheries, and it's not uncommon to see them switching gear throughout the year to take advantage of whatever species is passing. And with squid, it's just that there's enough squid within range of the port, I think, that they became a big squid fishing industry there. So that is their primary fish, but they do catch almost anything. I was there one year, and there was these huge blue barrels on the deck of a big dragger, and the barrels were all filled with holes, all brand new. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I asked somebody, and they were slime eel fishing. They were going to try slime eel fishing. I guess the Asian population will eat slime eels, which when you grab a slime eel, it puts out enough slime to fill up your house. I didn't see that boat fish for it very long. They made some trial thing, and I think they decided that wasn't for them. But there was almost nothing they wouldn't try fishing for if there was a market for it.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left, but how much has supply from foreign competitors contributed to the reduced size of the fleet and smaller harvest?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, years ago, again, so my statistics aren't current, but a couple of years ago, it was about 92% of the fish we eat comes from other countries. So that's a huge percentage. Certainly makes a big difference. We do heavily regulate the fishing industries, and other countries may not, or may not regulate them at all. So that's a problem. There's all kinds of pressures that they face, both from government regulations, fish that are there. It's a very complicated business in terms of the government. And what happens is the government acts very slowly. So with the waters that have been warming due to global warming, the southern fish are now up here, and the fish that used to be the typical fish in Point Judith are now all the way up into Nova Scotia, trying to keep in the water temperatures that they like. So while fish that we never or were never typically targeted here are now here, the government is not allowing them to catch them because they never had, and they're throwing all of this high value fish overboard because they're not allowed to catch it. And by the time those fish move on, the government will finally say, okay, you can catch them. And that typically is what happens. They just react so slowly.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very tough industry to stay afloat in.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you. I mean, this has been incredibly enlightening, and I'll never look when I get on the Block Island Ferry again. I'll never look at this industry the same again. It's been really enlightening.
Yeah, well, good. That was the hope, is that people would understand a little more when they get on the ferry what they're actually seeing there.
I should say when I have the chance to get on the ferry someday.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mark. We really appreciate it, and hope to see you again. And thank you, everybody.